So welcome and good evening, everyone. I'm Mayor Mary Lou Pauly, and I will be hosting tonight's community forum on Issaquah's action plan. We could have a very large crowd tonight. We have 34 people, but we had, I believe, Joanne can correct me, 70 to 80 that signed up, and so others may be joining us later. While this is not a council meeting per se, there may be a few council members with us here tonight just to listen. We are recording this so that all of our council members may be able to view our meeting. So thank you for joining us. I have a few introductory remarks to share before I hand this over to staff for a brief presentation. Issaquah is a culturally rich and diverse community, and we strive to be a welcoming and inclusive place for everyone who calls Issaquah home. But more work needs to be done. Following the senseless death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, people across our country, including in Issaquah, have rightfully demonstrated against racial injustice throughout the country. The Black Lives Matter demonstrators have asked that we take this moment to talk about what we need to do as people, as residents, and as community members to recognize racial bias and make changes to eliminate the disproportionate damage it is doing to people of color. As a first step last month, I presented a draft Issaquah Police Accountability, Equity, and Human Services Action Plan to our community and City Council. And I am now seeking community feedback through tonight's forum. We will present an overview of this draft plan and then take time to listen to comments and to answer questions. All of your input will be shared with the City Council, which is scheduled to vote on which is scheduled to receive a final version of the city's plan during its August 10th meeting. So before we dig into the draft plan, I just want to cover a few of our meeting logistics. Whether you have called in or you're joining us via video, everyone should be muted at this time. Please don't unmute your mic unless we have called on you to speak. WebEx offers a chat feature, but we are not using it during this meeting. Please do not use the chat feature since it is not compatible for this meeting format and can prove to be very distracting for participants and presenters. At the end of the presentation, we'll take a brief break in the meeting to assess how many of you would like to ask a question or make a comment or both. So to let me know that you would like to ask a question or comment, please use the raising your hand feature, and if you open up the participants list and go by your name, you'll see a raised hand that you can click on when we get to that portion of the meeting. If you have called in, please use *3 on your phone. If neither of those is working, at the end of comments and questions, I will ask if anybody has been missed, and you can just use your voice to indicate that you would like to have an opportunity to speak or ask a question as well. I will go over the instructions on that portion of the meeting later, just before we start the Q&A and our comments. So you are welcome and encouraged to use your video during the call. The video button is next to the mute button at the bottom. When the button is red, you are not on video. When it is black, your video is on. If someone is not on video, you will see a circle with their initials. And finally, we're recording this meeting so we can share it with those who could not join us tonight. So now I'd like to introduce City Administrator Wally Bobkiewicz and Issaquah Police Chief Scott Behrbaum, and they are going to cover the draft action plan. Wally.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for the members of the community that are with us this evening. I'm joined by Chief Scott Behrbaum, the Chief of Police. And what we're going to do this evening is walk you through some of the points in the action plan that Mayor Pauly referred to. But Joanne, can you bring up the PowerPoint slides, please? Next slide, please. We're first going to focus on the Issaquah Police Department's use of force policy. And I'll ask Chief Scott Behrbaum to walk us through some of the evaluation that we've done from the policy. And again, as Mayor Pauly said, we're happy to answer questions at the conclusion of the presentation. Chief Behrbaum, good evening. You're still on mute, Chief.
I fell for that mute button. I apologize. Good evening. I am Chief Scott Behrbaum. Tonight, I will provide a quick overview of our department use of force policies, similar to the presentations I've provided in prior meetings to other community members and also to council. After the death of George Floyd, one of the initial initiatives that came to the forefront of discussion within our community was 8 Can't Wait. This initiative was created for a national scale and identified 8 critical policies to examine in police departments. The initiative recognized that not all police departments are the same and are subject to different policies and state laws. The intent was to provide direction for police reform that could possibly be addressed nationwide. I've reported to City Council that I believe that our department's policies are in line with the policies outlined on their website. A quick side note about policies. A policy manual is a living document. We regularly update our policies with changes in case law or new legislation. Our department also utilizes Lexipol Policy Manual Management System. That is a risk management-based best practice policy manual that regularly updates to model current case law as well as federal and state requirements. Our policies are written to provide specific guidance to employees on expectations for responding to and managing calls, interacting with the community, and the documentation of those interactions. I'd like to further preface this section of the presentation with the fact that police use of force incidents are dynamic, and officers are forced to make split-second decisions about the amount of force to use in any given situation with limited information and in circumstances that are uncertain and rapidly evolving. Ultimately, our officers do not want to use force. They would rather prefer that all encounters with individuals are peaceful and without incident. When officers have to use force, they respond to the actions of the individuals they are interacting with and overcoming that individual's actions. Police officers are authorized by law to use amounts of force that reasonably appear necessary given the facts and circumstances perceived by the officer at the time of the event to accomplish a legitimate law enforcement purpose. Next slide, please. I'm going to briefly go through the 8 different policies and reference what our policies are related to that. In law enforcement, chokehold is also technique is called the vascular neck restraint or carotid hold, and has been previously approved technique to subdue violent individuals. This technique is now considered to be equivalent of deadly force. In prior communications, I've stated that we allowed the vascular neck restraint in our policy, but I've made the decision to remove the use of the carotid hold or the vascular neck restraint from our policy manual and to not allow the use of the technique anymore. We do not train for or support the use of this technique as the use of force option. We have allowed for this technique previously, and in 2018, we did have a use of force incident that indicates the use of a carotid hold. At that time, it was allowed by policy and the officer was trained in its application. During that incident, however, the officer actually did not fully utilize the technique, and as the officer moved towards the application of it, the subject complied and was placed into handcuffs. The next policy is requiring a warning. IPD policy 300.4 requires a verbal warning when feasible when using deadly force. Additional IPD policies outline the requirement of a verbal warning prior to using other less lethal force options, such as using a taser or impact projectiles. The reason why when feasible is present in the policy is the fact that not all circumstances allow officers to give a warning. Time, distance, barriers might not allow an officer to give warning prior to using force. Banning shooting at vehicles. IPD policy 300.4.1 does not outright ban shooting at moving vehicles, but does outline a very narrow application. There is an expectation that officers do not intentionally place themselves in front of a moving vehicle and that they make an effort to remove themselves from harm. Additionally, there are circumstances that may leave no alternative to the officer to stop a threat to others who are in imminent danger. I need to take a step back here for a moment. Our policy manual is published on our police department website and is accessible for anyone. So as we talk about these policies, I want to make sure that you know that there is a reference point on our website. Next slide, please. The next 3 policy areas are covered by numerous overlaying policies within the department manual that are applicable to how an officer responds to each call that may require de-escalation and require them to only use reasonable force while performing their duties. The Issaquah Police Department policies related to use of force identify what techniques are acceptable in certain circumstances and what would not be acceptable in others. The policy manual outlines which techniques and tools should only be used in deadly force situations, while others should only be used when passive resistance is being used on the officer. The policies provide guidance of how and when force should or should not be used. Ultimately, there may be instances when we are unable to de-escalate, use all alternatives, or stay on a straight line continuum. However, our department is committed to the sanctity of life. We recognize the value of all human life, and we want to resolve all interactions safely for all involved. These overlaying policies provide an excellent framework for our employees to work towards preservation of life. Our police department policies surrounding use of force and de-escalation are clear that officers are expected to continuously evaluate the totality of circumstances and act in an objectively reasonable manner. Next slide, please. Duty to intervene. Policy 300.2.1 does require an officer to intervene when observing another officer using force that is beyond what is objectively reasonable. Additionally, as part of that, it is required that an officer report to a supervisor their observations. The requirement for comprehensive reporting, or policy 300.5, requires officers document their use of force. The policy also outlines a review of the incident by the immediate supervisor at the time of the incident, as well as additional review steps up through the chain of command. Each use of force is tracked in a log that documents the type of force used, the circumstances surrounding the incident, and the demographics of those involved. Additionally, the department performs an annual use of force review for any trends, concerns, training opportunities, equipment needs, or policy revisions. That use of force tracking log has been provided to council and is available as part of the agenda packet from June 29th on our city website. Next slide, please. At this point, I'm going to hand it back over to City Administrator Bobkiewicz to talk about some of the draft action plans.
Thank you, Chief Behrbaum. As the mayor indicated, this action plan is divided into three areas: short-term actions, medium-term actions, and long-term actions. And we're going to walk through each of those individual points now. The short-term actions are those that we would commit to doing in the next month's time by the end of August. The first is the review and modification of the police department's use of force policy. Chief Behrbaum has reviewed where we stand with the policy, and one purpose of this meeting this evening is to get additional comments on the department's use of force policy. It's our intention then to come back to the City Council on August the 10th with a review of that and any modifications that might be necessary in addition to those already outlined by Chief Behrbaum. Second is a renewed enhancement of police department reporting on calls for service, on uses of force. And you'll see throughout this document, we plan to have this be an iterative process. So we will have some initial changes to reporting during the month of August, additional changes before the end of the calendar year 2020, and then changes that we'll commit to through 2021. And I'll talk more about those in a few minutes. And three is City Council equity training. This action plan is police accountability, equity, and human services. So there are component parts for equity and human services, which we'll review shortly. But the City Council is committed to beginning a process of equity training. And part of this plan has that commitment beginning starting in August of 2020. Next slide. Medium-term actions, those would be actions between now and the end of the calendar year, and I'll turn it back over to Chief Behrbaum to focus on those pertaining particularly to the police department. Chief? You're on mute, Chief.
Sure, thank you. We are starting the process of submitting budget and operations. And this fall, we will begin reviewing the police department budgets and talking with the council about what is going to be the plan for staffing and services provided by the agency. It will indeed include a possible inclusion of focus on human services and how to include that with police daily operations. We will continue to review our use of force review and reporting to make sure that we're up with current standards. And we are going to update our complaint process to make sure that we have it easy and accessible to our community members, either online or if someone comes in person. We're going to perform an extensive review of our training program to make sure that we are meeting all requirements for the state and really focus on de-escalation, crisis intervention for our police department members as well. Let me see. And again, as City Administrator Bobkiewicz mentioned earlier, that we're going to continue to look at our data collection and our reporting of all things and providing that to our community and also our council. Next slide, please. We've already begun the conversation with the school district on the use of school resource officers. Ultimately, it is a partnership with the school district and the police and the city of Issaquah on whether or not school resource officers should be within the schools. With remote learning coming up this fall, I am sure that there will be an ongoing conversation and there'll be opportunities for either our community and or to have that discussion with the school district and also with the city. Again, we're going to be looking for more opportunities to provide updated briefings to the council on crime information and all of the data surrounding our police department operations. And I think I'm going to hand it back over to our city administrator for these next steps.
Thank you, Chief. Number 8 deals with citywide equity training, development and implementation. And this is citywide training for our City of Issaquah staff. We have an equity team that has been in place for a little over a year that has been looking at issues that we can work on as a city staff. I've charged them along with Mayor Pauly to look at a broader training program. So that group is already underway looking at a training program that would be developed that would be an iterative program, not just 1 or 2 trainings, but a curriculum of trainings over the course of probably 2 years that we would be putting all city staff through. And so that city equity team is in the development of that curriculum right now. And our plan is to begin implementing those trainings before the end of the calendar year. Next is the broadening of the city's Human Services Commission. The City of Issaquah for a number of years has had a Human Services Commission. Its primary focus has been to review grant applications from local nonprofits looking for support in the good work that they do. This action plan proposes to look at the charge of the Human Services Commission and look to broaden its responsibilities to look for community issues, equity, human services issues throughout the community. Number 10 is to look at our citywide human services staffing and contracting resources. The city has a limited number of staff positions devoted to human services. Really, we have 1 full-time position within our Parks and Community Services Department. We are looking to review that as part of our 2021 budget process to make sure that we have appropriate staffing resources, not only of city staff, but also contracting with other surrounding agencies, nonprofits, to help us with our work serving the Issaquah community. Next slide. These next are long-term actions that we would complete through next year, 2021, and I'll turn it back over to Chief Behrbaum.
Making sure. Okay. Long-term. First is going to be the review of police department recruitment and hiring, and specifically focus on how the Civil Service Commission can be impactful on ensuring that we have the right kind of recruiting practices and examining that critical role of the Civil Service Commission, ensuring that we have a diverse candidate pool for police officers and other police department employees. Next, we're going to be reviewing the police department policies for discipline and termination. The Human Resources Department is going to be partnering with us to review all of our policies and make recommendations to the city administration on potential revisions. These revisions will likely require negotiations with employee bargaining units. We're also going to be looking at the possible formation of a review for a community board or commission to help look at our policies, procedures, and just look at how police operations occur within the city and continue to have that ongoing conversation. Longer term, we again want to create a data dashboard presenting information on a variety of measurable outcomes. The city has been looking at performance measurement for a lot of the different functions within the city, and long term, we would like to create a data dashboard for the police department as well. We also want to review the schedule of all of our police department local fines and fees, and we're also going to do a thorough review of our asset seizure policies. So we will be working to conduct a review and report to City Council later with recommendations for any needed changes as well. Back to you, City Administrator Bobkiewicz.
Thank you, Chief. The last two items under long-term actions, number 6 is to create a racial equity toolkit. Many communities have come up with standard procedures, policies, templates to look at all city functions through what's known as an equity lens. And so we've asked our equity team to begin developing a racial equity toolkit that we can use to apply to our budget process, to the decisions on projects and programs throughout the city. And then number 7 really is that implementation part of number 6, to look at all of our city policies and procedures using a racial equity toolkit. So Mayor Pauly, members of the community, thank you for the opportunity to walk through the action plan. I believe the goal of the rest of the afternoon's discussion is just to get feedback, answer any questions that members of the public have. We'll take this input and use it as we look for any revisions to this proposed action plan. And again, Mayor Pauly's plan is to submit this to the City Council for its endorsement at its special meeting on Monday, August the 10th. Mayor Pauly, back to you.
Thank you, Wally. Thank you, Chief. I'm again going to turn off my video so it's not a distraction to everyone. So welcome everyone that is here this evening to join us. We now have 38 participants at our meeting. As the City Administrator pointed out, the hope tonight is that if you have any comments or feedback for us on this draft plan, you share them. I recognize that many of you have been following us at our meetings, but not all. So some of you may be here tonight because you have a general background question. You just want to ask whether or not our police department does X, Y, or Z. All questions are good questions. Whatever you need to ask is great. And we are specifically looking for feedback on the plan that you just saw. So we will now take a brief break in the meeting because I'd like to assess how many of you would like to ask a question or make a comment tonight. You will need to let us know by raising your hand. And if you do not want to ask at tonight's meeting, or if you think of a question or comment later, I encourage you to please feel free to email me at mayor@issaquah.gov. So that's mayor@issaquah.gov. I know sometimes when people go home, something pops in their head and you wish you'd asked it. So there's an opportunity to ask a late question or provide another comment. So in this WebEx format, in order to raise your hand, at the bottom of the screen, you will see a handful of icons. Fourth from the left is the hand icon, or you can open the participant list and find your name to raise your hand. You can press the button beside your name to raise your hand. If you're joining by phone and not computer, you can press *3 to raise your hand, and we will call on you that way. So I just want to take a few moments now and let Joanne sort of get a listing of how many questions they are before she begins to call out some names. So we'll just take a break. Joanne, are you able to see raised hands right now?
Yes, I am, Mayor Pauly. And at this time, we have 6 people who would like to speak. If we want to go ahead and get started, we can, or, well, maybe you need to let them know how much time they have.
Yeah, let's give another few seconds to see, half a minute or so to see if anybody's having difficulty doing that.
Okay, we're up to 7.
Great. You have a little bit more time. So this is not your only opportunity. I'm sure once we get the conversation going, you may think of a question at that time. So please raise your hand as we are going forward. Joanne is going to go through and call on you as she sees a raised hand. And go back to my notes here right now. So we are going to have enough time for each person in this first round of questions or comments to have up to 3 minutes to talk. I'm going to try and leave at least 15 or 20 minutes at the end for question and answer. If you have a comment, great. If you have a question, Joanne will Wally will be tracking those questions. We're going to tally up all the questions and answer them at the end. So make your comment, ask your question, and at the end we'll come back to your question. And after you have done with your comments or questions, please lower your hand by pressing the same hand icon button or pressing *3 again if calling from phone. During your time, you can ask a question or make comments, and we'll come back to those at the end. We as a group are here to listen tonight, and we want to provide everyone the opportunity to participate. We want to hear all the points of view, and we understand that there are many sources of anxiety and tension right now for everyone, and that there is a lot of passionate people who want to be heard. So you may hear contrary opinions that you find upsetting or uncomfortable tonight, but this is a public dialogue, and we want all voices to be heard. So my ask is that you be patient and kind and thoughtful, and give your fellow residents some gracious space. There is room for everybody in this big tent that we have here tonight. So Joanne, will you call out the name of our first person?
Yes, first speaker will be Hannah. And Hannah, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You have the floor.
Hi, Hannah.
Hi. Sorry. Hi. Yeah, I've been, thanks for having the meeting, and thanks for letting everybody come together and see what's going on with the community. I was able to participate in the Citizens Police Academy one time last year, so I got to go that 10-week class that you guys, that Issaquah puts on, which is amazing, and it really goes into depth on explaining what the Issaquah Police Department does and what they go through, how they work, and they even give examples of what they see on a day-to-day basis on their traffic stops and everything. So I just want to make, I'm just very worried that part of this is Issaquah Police Force is not a large police force. When I'm reading your memo, the entire police force, including everybody said and done, is only 61 people. And we're talking about having new teams. We're talking about having more rules that the officers are not going to have to follow. I'm just concerned, how is everything going to be maintained properly? How are we going to move with only so few officers? And the people are actually talking about actually getting rid of some officers. How are we going to maintain all of our current laws and regulations? I mean, because I mean, I don't want to be too long in this because I know everybody's waiting, but I'm looking at Seattle right now, and I'm scared. Like, I don't go down to Seattle anymore. I mean, I'm not scared of my life, obviously, but I don't feel comfortable going down there. Me and my loved ones, all of us have just purchased guns, like flat out, and we're not the only ones. I mean, when I go to all these gun stores, we have people in line, like people waiting, because they are so fearful that the police are not going to have any power whatsoever to stop anything that happens. Like, what happens if a protest comes to Issaquah? And we're limiting everything that they can do. How can they protect us? I mean, I just don't. With only in that class, that citizen police class, they talked about only having 8 officers on duty at any given time. 8 officers. That's so small. That's insanely small to only have 8 officers at any given time on staff. And now we're talking about, oh, we need to move these to the equity team. Now we need to move these guys to have more training. That's more and more people off the street helping stop crimes. How are you gonna do all of these while maintaining a low crime rate?
Thank you, Hannah. A couple of questions in there that we'll save. I did want to let the chief, when he comes back with questions, also to clarify what your staffing level is, because it's not 8 during a shift, but we'll get back. Yeah, we'll get to that later. Thank you very much. Joanne, who's next on the speakers list?
Sherry Smith, you're next. Okay. You have the floor.
Yeah, you're on, Sherry. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. I have 3 questions for the chief, so I'll make them quick. Is the department currently accredited by the Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs currently? And the techniques that you have banned, I believe there were 2 of them. Are they still approved as a technique through the WASPIC standards? And I was also curious as to if you have minimum manning per shift and how many that was. And when you were, this makes 4, sorry, how you are advised, Chief, of when there is a use of force and how high that use of force is before you are advised of that.
Great questions. Thank you, Sherry. Joanne, who's next on the list?
Okay, next we have Sarah Jerome. Sarah, you are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi there. My question is what the position of Black Lives Matter King County and King County Equity Now is on this action plan. And if they haven't provided input yet, I would like to know what the mayor, the police chief, and the city administrator are doing to actively approach and pursue the specific input of Black-led, progressive, anti-racist groups.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Joanne, who's up for next for a comment or question?
Thank you. The next person is John. John, I have unmuted you. Please go ahead and speak.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thanks again for hosting this. Appreciate the opportunity. A few questions here. One is what number of interactions do we have in this use of force? If I think about that in a typical year and, you know, as a portion of the community, like how many people are actually engaging with these use of force situations. And then the second one would be, I think, a few different points. For the chief, do we think we're going to be safer as a community with these changes? I understand we're balancing safety with a lot of other things, but I'm trying to really understand. I think building on what Hannah was saying, some of these changes have led to some pretty outrageous increases in violence, and I want to understand what our expectations are around the safety of the community. And I think related to that, on school resource officers, I realize that's a medium term. Same thing, though, same question, right? Are my students in the high school going to be safer as we go through this, and what do we expect there? Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Joanne, who's next on our list?
Great, thank you. Next up is Catherine. Catherine, I have unmuted you. Please go ahead.
Hi, Catherine.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you just great.
Thank you so much for this opportunity to comment on this proposed plan. I actually have many concerns about it. However, I'm going to address just 2 points and the chief's response that he shared to a safe Issaquah. Safety is a top priority for my family, and I expect for the majority of our wonderful community. So number 1, the wording in the plan implies that there are big problems in Issaquah and that our community is in a bad place. But look around. This is not true. Well, there's always room for improvement and growth and everyone and everything. The Issaquah Police Department is well respected in our community and is doing a great job. So why are you rushing into approving and implementing this plan when we're, number 1, in the middle of a pandemic, it's summer, and it's not the best nor the fairest time for community input on something this important? I asked the administration and the council to slow down this process, take time to properly and adequately gather community input, and in a variety of ways, including this meeting, but including like an online survey before moving forward with any of this plan. Waiting also gives Issaquah a chance to study what other communities are doing, what's working and what's not working. And like the old adage goes, if Issaquah ain't broke, don't rush to fix it. Thank you, Chief, for the information that you shared. God bless you and the entire police department of Issaquah. Your report addressed the 8-count weight practices that the Issaquah Police Department is already following. So again, Why the rush with this plan? In the report in 2019, there were 14,673 calls, with only 27 patrol calls reported having a use of force, which is 0.019%. Now, if you add in the 4 in the jail to both for a total of 33, even that is only 0.022%. There is no way a police department can be accused of using excessive force. So why are we so addressing this issue? The reporting is very detailed that he's also shared in the paperwork, providing accountability. So why the desire to add more reporting, possibly making their officers' jobs more cumbersome? Their jobs are difficult enough as it is. They put their lives on the line for us every day. And in some ways, the 8 Can't Wait program isn't even applicable to our police department or community. In personally talking with Issaquah Police Department officers, they've echoed that they're already following these practices, and also a concern was mentioned about additional trainings. Training is already happening, and they all cost money. What department might potentially suffer cuts?
Catherine,
Am I at 3 minutes already?
yes, please summarize. Thank you.
Can I summarize?
Catherine, just summarize. That would be great, and then we'll move on. Thanks.
Okay, so in the financial plan, fiscal responsibility is a critical area that all citizens expect. And so how can you approve and adopt a plan without knowing the financial effects of the proposed changes ahead of time? We hold Issaquah accountable in all areas, especially in this one. So to review, I'm asking you, number one, please wait, take time to do it right, and slow down the passing of this plan. Identify what the problems are, if any, and then offer opportunities for community input. And I'm asking for fiscal responsibility connected to this plan and have the costs identified prior to approving the plan. All lives matter. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. Joanne, next on our list.
Okay, next up is Timothy. Timothy, I've unmuted you. Please go ahead and make your comments or ask your question.
Thank you, Mayor, Police Chief, and City Administrator for this opportunity to get involved in helping our community. The action plan looks like a great framework, but I would urge more training and education to have been put in place in all city departments since early June, if not already. For the Issaquah Police Department specifically, the baseline staffing of the police department now is only 61. By end of June, I hope leadership provided necessary training and resources without hesitation. This is the hope I have for all city departments as well. Firearm pointing was 0 last year and already 3 this year to date. Use of force incidents have steadily increased since 2015. It only takes one racially charged incident for things to go horribly wrong, and no one can guarantee this can't happen at any time. This means we need to take more steps now to prevent such a possibility. I am coming at this from a place of compassion. The following items listed in the plan are great short and long-term goals we can start implementing today and surely iterate over the coming years. The introduction of body cameras, the review of jail operations, the incorporation to dedicate professional mental and behavioral health professionals into day-to-day department operations. Review all training programs, and also review current police department recruiting practices and examine role of civil service commission in ensuring diverse candidate pool. The list goes on. Racial equity toolkit. As a United States Marine veteran, you can't have enough training when it comes to protecting those you're there to protect and fighting alongside. This applies to the Issaquah Police Department as well. Many veterans now serve as police officers. Some I've served with as a Marine. I'm grateful for their service then and now. More policies and procedures should be put in place to help police officers know when to actually react with self-defense while using deadly force. Based on what I've seen in this documentation for the Issaquah Police Department procedures, more could be done to fully empower officers with how to properly react safely and appropriately when officers assume threat to their lives. That should speak volumes that the taser section in the documentation is outlined longer than the firearm section. I would like to see the training plan for the Issaquah Police Department and provide a chance to give my feedback. In summary, to summarize, I'm also willing to support the equity team and police review community board. I recommend that all city department employees and police officers take the Harvard Implicit Unconscious Bias Race Test and start educating yourself on anti-racism. I also, in closing, ask that Issaquah residents be provided information on any systemic racist policies, either school zoning, housing and segregation, voting options, etc., that may still exist today and what actions are being taken to address them. If you're a white like myself, you have white privilege and especially have a responsibility to take action towards anti-racism today. Thank you for keeping an open mind, listening, learning, and taking action today. Timothy Dees.
Thank you, Timothy. Joanne, who's next on our list?
Okay, next we have Courtney, and Courtney, I've unmuted you. Please go ahead.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you perfectly.
Great. So it was really exciting to hear Chief Behrbaum walk through a variety of the policies that we have in place today and how they ladder up to some of the important recommendations made to help our community be more equitable. One of the things I was hoping to hear a little bit more from in what was laid out in the action steps, both especially in the short and medium term, was more around the accountability for how these policies are going to be enforced. Because it is a hope that with all these policies in place, that everything is followed and that everything is done as expected based on these policies. But the accountability is where I was hoping to see a little bit more from in the actions taken in the short and medium term. That's all.
Thank you, Courtney. Next up, Joanne.
Okay, next we have Daniel. Daniel, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Daniel.
Hi, thank you. Well, you know, we've heard a couple people here that are afraid that less or a different allocation of resources for the police will make our community unsafe. They're afraid of protesters. And I just wanted to say, as someone who has been protesting in Issaquah, I haven't seen violence. And I think, when people look at Seattle, they're seeing the protesters reacting to the police there and to the way that the police are responding to their protests. And we're not having things like that happening in Issaquah because our community feels like, in general, they're pretty happy with the police, and the police have not responded to the protesters in an inappropriate way. So, I think there's the idea that some inrush of protesters are going to come in if the police presence is reduced is a bit ridiculous to me, because I'm very encouraged by what I'm hearing at the meeting today about this plan. So we're getting what we want. We're absolutely not going to be trying to damage any property. I mean, that's never what any of us want. We live here. We don't want to see our community be hurt. And I would love to ask if the chief could talk to us about, how often does the police department stop a violent crime in progress? Have there been any interactions that the police have had with protesters? My suspicion is that there is not some sea of criminals that are just waiting to pounce as soon as we blink or anything like that. So I'd love to get some more details about that. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. Joanne, I'm just kind of looking over here in my notes. Should I be going to Wendy next, or asking if Wendy wants to ask a question or make a comment? Wendy. Sure. Not sure if your hand is up or not, so you can just let us know if we've made a mistake.
On the list.
Can you say that
I'm
again,
sorry.
Wendy?
I did put my hand up on the list.
Great.
On the...
Would you like to go ahead?
I would.
Awesome. You have the floor.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mayor, City Council, and Police Chief for having this meeting and providing all the information to us in your action plan. It looks like it took a lot of thought and work for you to put it together. And I had time to review it. The mayor was kind enough to send me a copy immediately when I requested it by email. And I had a couple of points that I made that I'd like to just tell the group about. In the background, it states that the Black Lives Matter demonstrators asked the City Council to recognize racial bias and make changes to eliminate the disproportionate damage it is doing to the community members of color. It also states that at the June 15th meeting, public comments were heard urging police reforms. Well, I watched that meeting of June 15th, and I saw as many people asking for support of the police and that they not be defunded as I did people asking for the opposite. So I just wanted to put that into the record. Then I went to see what the Black Lives Matter website had to say about police defunding, and I sent the quote to the City Council and the Mayor directly from their website, and it's titled, "What Defunding the Police Really Means," dated July 6, 2020. It says, "We know that police don't keep us safe." That's how it starts. And just to address that part, I would ask the City Council and the Mayor, the Police Chief as well, when considering what changes you are going to make, what evidence is there that the Issaquah police don't keep us safe? When a husband or a boyfriend is about to attack his wife or girlfriend, who can she call for help? When a young girl is raped on her way home from a friend's house, who will find and arrest the rapist? Does the Issaquah Police Department, here's one of my questions, does the police department have a log of citizen complaints of police misconduct? If so, can we receive a copy listing the type and number of complaints in each category since 2015? If not, I would recommend that they start keeping such a log. After reading the lengthy police report and the attached documents, these were my recommendations besides the log. I would say that the city should purchase body cams to be worn by all police officers while on duty. There should be training in justice and equity for all city employees and police. And police funding should remain at its current level. In order to keep our communities safe for all residents, regardless of race, we need a well-funded and well-equipped police force. With body cams and proper oversight and training, that is more than possible. Currently, the public schools in our community have an A+ rating, while the crime and safety factor has a B- rating. Two examples of crimes that require more vigilance in our community are rape and theft. Figures from 2019 are per 100,000 residents.
Wendy, please summarize your comments. You've reached your time.
Okay, well, basically we're above the national average on rapes and theft, those two crimes. These numbers should concern everyone in the community. This is not a time to defund the police who put their lives on the line for us every day they go to work. It is a time to unite in supporting the police department and giving them the equipment and the training they need to be fair and to be effective. Thank you.
Wendy, thank you for your comments and your questions. Joanne, who else is on our list?
Next is Marina. Marina, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Hi,
Hello. Thank you all for hosting this. It's really wonderful to see everybody get so involved and actively asking questions and educating themselves. I did want to wholeheartedly agree with Dan when he said, I heard a question, what if protesters come to Issaquah? And the point is we have been in Issaquah. That is why this is happening. We've been here for 2 months and we've been nothing but peaceful. And in my opinion, it's brought the community together, people who felt like they didn't have a voice in Issaquah. Something else that I wanted to point out is, like, lots of people are saying there's no issues with use of force here in Issaquah, but the city and the police department is being sued for use of force. The death of Mr. Lang, who was an elderly man with Alzheimer's who couldn't speak English. So his death was based off of a miscommunication. There are issues in Issaquah, even if people don't see it. I'm not saying that I don't feel safe here or anything like that. I very much appreciate a lot of what police officers do around town, but I've heard from many police officers that they feel like they are being stretched very thin based off of what their job requires of them, handling lots of mental health issues. 20% of the calls are community caretaking phone calls. So, you know, instead of maybe a police officer who doesn't really understand how to approach someone with Alzheimer's disease or mental health breakdown, somebody who's maybe more equipped for that, like a mental health professional, would be a little bit more appropriate, and would possibly save lives, would make people feel a little more comfortable at the very least. I do agree that proper training is very important. Issaquah only requires 720 hours of training right now. And in countries all over the world, Europe especially, is 2 to 4 years, and you have to have a degree, which is very much similar to doctors and nurses and firefighters who have to also work with lives and are first responders. They have a lot of training. And I think it's really important that is also, you know, addressed, and accountability as well. Accountability for police officers within their excuse me, you know, the accountability. Cops are holding themselves accountable, not outside, you know, outside forces or people or citizens. So I think, again, accountability, proper training, a reallocation of funds possibly for that 20% of community caretaking calls would be it would go a really long way in the community. So thank you.
Thank you, Marina. We have a few more people before we start getting some answers to questions. So Joanne, who's next on our list?
Okay, next is William. William, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate you guys having me tonight. And Chief, thanks for being here and talking with us. One of the things that I'd like to touch on that the last caller talked about in training for police in Europe and that regard. When we look at Issaquah and we say that Issaquah has 61 members, you're talking, if that was sworn officers, we would have about 1 officer for every 655 people in this town. Tokyo is the safest city in the world. They have over 14 million people. They have 40,000 police officers. That's 1 officer for every 350 people. They suffer a homicide rate that is 1/100th of the US national average. It is not acceptable in any way, shape, or form to talk about taking money and officers off the street in Issaquah. If we want to send social workers, if we want to send people to help them, that's an entirely different story. But when we talk about defunding the police and having less officers on patrol, that's simply not acceptable. It's just, and then as she talked about too, with the training, when we say that they go to the training academy, that's not the end of their training. They go out, they're not given a gun and said, go enforce the law. There's hundreds of hours of on-field training, just like doctors do in residency, before they're allowed to go out there in the public. So there's a lot of education that can be done. Without a doubt, the people that are looking for change are looking for change for the better. And I hope that we can have those discussions, but no money can come from this department. We are at a bare minimum for this city as it is. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Joanne, who do we have next up?
next is Lena. Lena, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Lena.
Hi. Thank you for having me here today. Thank you for hosting this meeting. I'll make this really quick. I just wanted to voice my unequivocal support for integrating mental health specialists and crisis counselors and trained folks in those areas into our police department. And we do not have to look very far for examples on how to do that. The city of Redmond has a homeless outreach specialist, a mental health counselor, and a crisis outreach person on their staff. I think that would be a great first step to be able to redirect some of those 20% of community caretaking calls and be able to more use the time and the efforts of the police force here in a better way. And I would urge, again, the city council and the police chief to look at what kind of budgeting areas of the police department we may be able to divert to social services and human services here in Issaquah. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lena. Joanne, do we still have some additional people signed up to make comments or questions?
Yes, we do. We have two more. Jen S., you're next.
Oh, sorry, just unmuting myself. Thanks. So that, great work putting this draft together. I had an overall, I'll start with an overall question about the format of this. So it's called the Issaquah Police Accountability, Equity, and Human Services Action Plan. And when I looked through it, I was a little bit confused because it's mostly about police accountability, but then there's sections that are just talk about council. There's sections that talk about human services. And so in my mind, it looks more like an Issaquah Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Action Plan with sections under it that speak to police accountability, human services, and Issaquah council and staff. So I don't know, I don't know if you're just trying to integrate EDI into everything you do, and this sort of was the best way to go about that. And maybe that is the case, but it was a little bit muddled through my reading. Under the short term number 2, I would encourage you to think when you're putting together a monthly report that it not be too dry if you want good feedback on it. So maybe an infographic that that easily shows the calls for service, the types of calls, the use of force, et cetera, instead of like a 3-page or 10-page report, monthly report that no one's going to read. Medium term number 1 speaks to what Lena was just talking about, which I fully agree with in terms of bringing in mental health professionals. And I was wondering what the process is going to be for focusing on how best to incorporate those people, right? So we know about COAST, we know about Cahoots, we know about a program in Austin, Texas. There's a program in Honolulu, Hawaii. There's staff in Redmond up the street. So I think maybe putting together a spreadsheet that compares the different exercises that are already out there and what might fit best for Issaquah. Still under medium on number 9, I had concerns about I like the idea of opening up the scope of human services and certainly the idea of bringing in people that have not been brought in before. And I guess I'd want to be part of the understanding of what their new responsibilities are going to be. One of which it sounds like would be, they're receiving updates on this EDI plan, but would they also have a say in its implementation? With the long-term number 6, development of a racial equity toolkit. Don't reinvent the wheel there. Like you said, that stuff exists already. So just go after what best fits. And then I echo John and Courtney and others' questions about how success will be measured against this action plan, and how related but separate, how police accountability will be measured. Often we've seen it it's within inside the force that it's measured.
Jen, you've reached your time. Please summarize.
Thank you. Let's look outside the force for that measurement. So just a request to ensure that there's metrics attached to this action plan. Thanks for your time.
Great comments. Thank you, Jen, and some questions in there as well. I believe, Joanne, we have one more up. Is it Cindy?
We've got, now we have three more
Okay,
hands
great.
raised. Cindy is next. Cindy, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So what I want to know is what are the specific plans to look at the types of calls that are currently being directed to the police or to 911 in general, and also go back and survey residents about why sometimes we don't feel safe calling 911 or why we think it wouldn't be effective, and find out what would make us feel safe enough to call or feel like it would make a difference if we made a call. And I say this as a rape survivor. And then given the information of what calls are currently coming in and the feedback you get on why people don't call, go back and look at what resources beyond the police, so including the police because they are necessary, but also looking at mental health professionals, crisis counselors, social workers, other service providers, going back and looking at who can best address each of those needs and look at each one of those through the lens of different populations, people with hearing impairments, autistic people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, women, adults, children, teens, people with prior records, people with various disabilities. Look at them all from those different lenses and how any decisions you make will impact those different populations, and then adjust funding and staffing to meet those needs. It sounds like the plan right now says we seems to be going the other direction. It says here's where we've got a group of people staffed at various departments in the city. Do we move that up or down? And I just want to know what the plans are to look at it from the other side, of start from a need basis and then see where the gaps are and then try to figure out and work at it from both angles. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is how do people like myself with a lot of expertise in diversity, equity, and inclusion become involved so that not just these issues we're hearing about now with the police, but all aspects of city government are more equitable? I know there are some commissions, there are different things that are available. Are there new ways you're looking at bringing in people who have expertise in these areas, who can help make sure that as an entire community, we operate as equitably as possible for all of the residents and visitors to the city? That's it.
Great comments and questions, Cindy. Thank you. Joanne, who's our next?
Okay, next up is Connie. Connie, you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Connie.
Hey. So I had a commercial store for a long time in Issaquah, and I will say the police have to serve the commercial areas far more than they do the residential areas. So that's sort of a unique perspective. I don't know that we actually have a policing problem. I think we could always improve our policing, and I would be interested in seeing how we could reduce their repetitive calls that they have to get the people with the addiction problems so that they aren't just popping them in and out of jail every week, every month, over and over and over. And it takes up a lot of time and energy. But what I see mostly is much of this is focused on the police. And I have a hard time finding many African Americans in town at all. And I find that far more disturbing than I find what I think our police are doing from their statistics. So why is it that we have so few African Americans who want to live in our town? The friends that I have had, they moved because it was uncomfortable being here. It was not an easy place to be Black. And I don't see that this plan addresses that core issue of almost a segregation in our community. We are doing better now with the Issaquah Highlands and Tallis, and we're getting more diversity. But really, we're pretty white bread, and I don't get it. I think that the more people of every different culture and color that we can get, the better our town is. And that is where I would like to go. I would like to have our Arts Commission, our Human Services Commission, our Parks Department, everybody selling all the celebrating the diversity that we do have to make it a place where people actually want to live, who aren't just white. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Joanne, I think we have one more.
We do. One more. Tom, you're up and you've been unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, Tom.
Hello, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. I want to say I'm just following up on an email that I sent on Monday evening to the mayor and council members. I believe it gets forwarded to, as well as a few other interested parties. And this is, the subject is a plan for Issaquah to become a nonviolent city. And I came across this project called the Nonviolent Cities Project recently, and I'm very excited about the possibility and want to propose that Issaquah pursue becoming the next nonviolent city. I believe this project can provide support and a well-documented roadmap for achieving the goals that are articulated by Mary Lou in her video post, Remarks on Racial Equity, and I think it clearly goes well beyond just addressing police accountability. It's more heavily weighted into addressing all the issues, including racial equity and all kinds of human services. This is a project that is already going on in 50 cities around the country. It was initiated in Carbondale, Illinois, and has been operating there for quite some time, some years. I think it goes back about almost 10 years now, successfully living a nonviolent, way of life for the whole community. And I believe this would lead to ending racism, poverty, homelessness, and violence at every level in our community. And we could be an inspiration for, the whole greater Seattle area and maybe even beyond, maybe the whole Pacific Northwest, if we were to take on this call to nonviolence. And there's a lot of details associated with it, and I'm sure it's a long-term kind of challenging project, but I believe it's one that I would like us to seriously consider embarking on the steps to achieve this. I believe we could get a lot of support through the organization that organizes and supports the other 50 cities that are doing this. So it's a way to, teach nonviolence in our schools, organize to end domestic violence, and teach nonviolence between spouses and nonviolence toward all children, and police violence, dismantle housing segregation, pursue racial, social, and economic nonviolent integration, and other things. So I realize it's broad, it's ambitious, it goes a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing, but I don't think really that far. And I think it would clearly be a solution to all the issues that all the parties have been raising here. And it would provide a way for us to communicate with each other. We'd all get educated in nonviolent communication techniques, and it would just be a really positive project that I believe we could get plenty of support on from the organization that's behind this. So I propose that we look into this project as a way forward to achieve all the goals we've been speaking of and protesting for during the past several weeks. And I am willing to participate, to volunteer for helping facilitate us getting in touch with the organization and whatever I can to help. So thank you very much, and I'll yield the rest of my time.
Thank you, Tom. Joanne, do we have any other hands up at this time?
No, I do not see any. Thank you.
So thank you for all the comments. Very, very thoughtful. And I hear so many commonalities between what you're saying. We wrote a very specific action plan that we felt we could be responsive within an appropriate amount of time, but it's actually a part of a much bigger puzzle for sure. I mean, we do have to look at ourselves as a community as a whole, which includes schools, and it includes ourselves, our neighbors, our store owners, everybody. So thank you for the comments. I think they're great. I know they were captured and will be shared with our City Council. City Administrator Bobkiewicz and Chief, there were a couple of different kinds of questions in here. Some were, how are you going to do something? And I'm not sure that tactically we've actually gotten that far in some of our conversations. So some may be questions where you can read the question, but we're going to have to come back and answer at a later date. Others are kind of informational about what you're currently doing. And then some of them are the big picture visionary ones. And again, those may be ones that you have a few comments, but we probably have to do more work on before we have a complete answer. So City Administrator Bobkiewicz, who has captured all the questions? Oh, I see. Okay. Looking over here. Okay, thank you very much, Wally. One of the first ones we had from Hannah was, how can we limit officers with any proposed cuts? And Chief, can you clarify your staffing levels?
Sure, absolutely. When I heard this question, yes, about staffing levels, we'll clarify on that first. Right now, we actually have 36 sworn police officers. That includes myself, my command staff, and the supervisors that patrol and provide police services for the city of Issaquah. We do have a total of 61 staff for the whole police department, but that includes our 911 dispatch center, our 72-bed jail, and our records division as well, the people that manage our police reports. So in general, we do have 35 sworn, again, including myself. Typically, we have approximately 24 assigned to patrol, and 24 of those officers are broken up into 4 different squads of up to 6 officers on each squad. So at any given time, we can have typically up to about 6 police officers, and typically we do not, because we are focused on training and or if someone is sick or vacations as well. So that kind of answers the overall staffing levels for our department.
I'm going to add another one in here. I thought Hannah asked, how could everything going forward be maintained if there were cuts? That was a sort of a sub question she had.
Yeah. Yes, I do. And I was frantically writing down notes as much as possible as everyone was asking their questions and making their comments. And I can go through that list as well. Ultimately, we triage calls. And when calls come into the 911 center or when calls for service come in to our police department, we are triaging them, whether or not they are an emergency or more of like an in-progress type call, or if they're maybe something that is a cold call, like somebody has come home and they realize that their package is missing from their front doorstep. We also triage them based on crimes of violence are more important than, let's say, a barking dog call. So there is a triage process that we respond to those. Ultimately, at any time of day, however many officers we have on, if we do have a crime of violence, that's of course the #1 priority, and that's what we're going to be focused on, responding to that and maintaining our response times to address that. So no matter what our staffing is, we're always going to be triaging those calls for service. And the crimes of violence, of course, are going to come first. And then we're going to start working our way through for what types of calls they may be, depending upon how fast we may respond. Does that, I hope that kind of answers or helps put that at ease. I mean, ultimately, we are going to continually, right now, even with our current staffing levels, that's what we do on a daily basis. We evaluate the calls for service and determine which ones we respond to first.
Yeah, I heard another little thing in there as well, Chief. So I agree with the characterization that I'm going to get all the names wrong. Lena, Marina, and who am I missing? That's on the call with us today. You know, the protesters and the demonstrations we had here, it felt very local, felt very Issaquah. Lots of good conversation was happening. I'm not sure how the community felt in terms of safety, but I do know that over the last few months, we have heard concerns from residents about things that have been happening in Seattle and nearby cities. And what I kind of heard in that question is, suppose something were to happen here, could you explain when you have 5 or 6 officers on, how would you respond if we did have an issue where we felt like there was somebody coming around to break windows or do something? What is it that you do?
Right. So again, we prioritize. Life safety is our #1 priority. So we're going to try and protect the life safety of our community members and those that could be impacted. Property is, secondary. And of course, it's unfortunate for a business owner. Obviously, that's going to be impacted, or a homeowner if something is damaged or stolen. Yes, it is. But again, our focus would be on that life safety. Ultimately, we do partner with a lot of our regional law enforcement agencies. So if we do have like a large scale event, we will request for other agencies to come in and to assist. That is something that you've seen across the King County area. When there is large scale incidents, they are requesting additional officers to help and respond to address maybe some of those crimes of violence. But you're right. There has been concerns about, could it happen in our community as well? Mm-hmm. We are continuously trying to monitor and evaluate, and we, again, have had some great community input for, like, if they heard something on social media, they reach out to us and they give us that information to be able to try and chase it down to verify. Throughout these last couple of months, any of the protests that we've had within our community have been peaceful. Ultimately, we've had some really good conversations with our community members that have demonstrated. We want to make sure that people have the ability to go out and express, their First Amendment rights. They have the ability to go out and demonstrate and to have these conversations and to, express their concerns about what is going on across the country and, in the region. So, ultimately, though, it is, again, it goes back to the triaging and monitoring, and our focus is life safety.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure people weren't uncomfortable hearing that we had 5 or 6 officers and we're kind of on our own, because we aren't. We're part of a much larger regional team. I'm going to do some of Sherry's questions now. She asked about department accreditation.
Yes. Yes, we are accredited, and we are actually in the process of being reaccredited. That's a 3-year process. We are, even within COVID, we've still been communicating with WASPIC to make sure that we are maintaining that process. Hopefully by this fall, we'll attain that reaccreditation. Again, accreditation is kind of the best practice reviews of policies and model policies and procedures for policing. The Washington Association of Sheriffs and Police Chiefs are the ones that help monitor that and provide the different standards that you have to meet. It's a combination of model policy, but it's also, this kind of answers some of the questions down the road about accountability, and it has annual reports on use of force, pursuits, bias-based policing. It's making sure that we are documenting the use of force. It's making sure that we are documenting all of our different aspects of all of our operations. And so it's a critical look at what we do, and it's over a 3-year period to make sure that we're consistently doing it and that we're following through with what those expectations are. So yes, we are accredited. We are working towards reaccreditation this year. The next part is the techniques that are addressed in the 8 Can't Wait as part of the WASPIC standards. Yes, and actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of the things that we are having a conversation at the larger level, 2 months ago, we had an emergency meeting with the King County Chiefs, and we sat down and we said, our community is asking for change. We need to start moving on this, and we need to make these changes. I have a list of items that we came up with, and we've been pushing through WASPIC as well. And this is part of our, we wrote a letter and we sent it to the governor and to our legislators to talk about it, where we do want a standardization of the use of force policies and training centered on the sanctity of human life. We are demanding an intervention for officers to intervene and report excessive force or misconduct. We want to make sure that all agencies across the state strive for accreditation. We do want to take a look at civil service and possibly reform it to make sure that we provide greater access for diverse candidates and enable department heads to greater flexibility to hire and promote officers who are best suited to carry out the community missions. We want to make sure that law enforcement agencies and corrections agencies establish intervention programs to address maybe those concerns about reporting and accountability of officers who are maybe headed down the road or employees who are heading down the road of excessive use of force. We've been discussing also establishing and monitoring of those independent investigations regarding use of force. Right now, state law does require that the agency utilize an outside agency to investigate any use of deadly force. We're also encouraging maybe just an independent statewide team governed by a board that includes community members to help address that as well. Some of the questions that were asked earlier or requests is to talk about the use and implementation of body cameras. That is something that we are pushing at that state level as well, pushing for implementation of body cameras across the state. We also want to have a conversation about interest arbitration. Interest arbitration is ultimately kind of the deciding with police officers of discipline and or contract negotiations, and we'd like to be able to have a deeper discussion about that, of how we can examine that. We also want to take a look at how police officers are licensed within the state and that they can lose their certification for excessive force or showing patterns of failing to follow like the public policy. That is something that is that we have pushed forward as well. And again, one of the final requirements is, of course, is requirement of all law enforcement agencies to submit data regarding the use of deadly force. That is something that this goes back to the transparency and accountability and trust. So those are some of the items that are being talked about at the state level as well. So it is a duty for us as law enforcement leaders to talk about it locally, but also at that state level. I think we answered the staffing levels question. And then one of the questions that Sherry, you asked about was the use of force and the notification to the chief. Typically, if our policy, we will report if there is someone says that they maybe were injured, and then we re-interview them, we have them checked with aid, we document that as a use of force. So even if we do a handcuffing and they complain of injury, then we typically mark that as a use of force, and then we'll forward that up the chain as well. So our threshold for just reporting it is very low in our department. It does not have to rise to a level of significant injury or a significant use of a tool or implement. It is really that at that lower level is when we actually document any kinds of use of force. When I get notified, like in the middle of the night, typically when they rise to a little bit more significant. So again, if someone just says, you know, my handcuffs hurt or I don't get notified in the middle of the night, but the next morning I will typically have the case report ready for me to review. The first line supervisor, so whoever the supervisor is on in the middle of the night, they actually do that first review. So they look at it right then and there. They actually interview the individual that this force was used upon, and they do their best to document, you know, from the incident. They, of course, review the officer's reports to make sure that everything is documented. But it typically gets forwarded to me, and by the next morning, I have that. If it's more significant, where there's a significant injury, then I'll probably get notified in the middle of the night about it.
Thank you, Chief. I had the unfortunate, I don't want to say pleasure, the unfortunate opportunity of doing a night ride along when a use of force occurred against an individual who was severely impaired and incoherent, and followed that up to the hospital where the patient was taken because of his personal medical conditions, and got to see firsthand how the supervisor responds. And I wonder if you could go over that a little bit. I was there with a night shift officer, but his immediate supervisor came up, and there was an interview process that went on with everybody, the witnesses, the police officers. I didn't realize that that interview would happen that quickly.
Yeah, we want to get to it right away. We want to talk to the individual that the force was used upon, because we think that's an important aspect of it. It's not just the officer's reports. We want to have the conversation with the individual that was involved in the incident, and typically we will try to, you know, photograph any injuries or any concerns. We want to get to it right away. We think it's extremely important to make sure that our actions are within policy and that we're following, you know, best practices.
Thank you. City Administrator Bobkiewicz, I'm going to ask you some questions that Sarah Jerome posed, because we did have another equity group review the plan, and I wonder if you could talk about that. So I don't believe that we did submit it to the Black Lives Matter movement, but we did submit it to a local equity group, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We did last week have a meeting with a local Issaquah equity committee. They had a session and they reviewed the plan as well. You know, some of the comments we received from that was regarding some of the timing of things, that there was some interest in moving some of the items up a little bit further. Certainly, the issues of working more closely with the school district. I don't know that we've talked a lot about the school resource officers at this point, but I think there was a concern about that as well. And we have a commitment to continue to work with that local group as we move forward. But we have not shared this plan you know, with any of the organized Black Lives Matter groups at this point.
City Administrator, I'm not that familiar with the community group. I did attend the meeting, but that is not a official City of Issaquah group. Is it a group that if members of this meeting today would like to join an organization within town, is that one that is open to the public to join in terms of being on that equity and inclusion team that they have?
You know, Madam Mayor, my understanding is it is not a formal group. I don't know that they're excluding membership. I think if people are interested in getting more information, they can email you at mayor@issaquah.gov, and we can get them in touch with the principals.
Okay. I mentioned that just so that this group is aware that prior to them reviewing our plan, they also set up a community panel with members of color in Issaquah and Sammamish, and it was a closed group. There were 50 people in attendance, and that is where I got to hear the stories of how people of communities of color, people of color have been treated in Issaquah and Sammamish, and it was personally chilling. It's not my experience. Some of the things that they had felt and lived through are very different. And so this group is a really great cross-section of professionals and volunteers who are interested in that. And I would suggest that any community members here who are interested in that, email me and I'll see if I can connect you with the group. It was a very, very powerful meeting that they held. So moving down through the questions list, I'm going to John. How many use of force interactions? And Chief, I'm not sure if you have that data or can share that data.
You're muted, Chief.
Never
Yes.
gets old.
Thank you. John, you asked about number of interactions of use of force. So in looking at it, and I know that Catherine actually shortly after that kind of identified some of the numbers. Just like over like the last, since I've been chief, we're looking at kind of just our numbers. We do average about 0.15% use of force per calls of service since the last 7 years, since 2014. And then per capita, it's 0.06%. So we do have a small number of uses of force. I do know that one of the concerns that one of the other our guests brought up about seeing that increase, I believe that was Tim, that talked about that increase of uses of force, and those are things that are concerning to us, and we want to make sure that we continue to address them. Ultimately, as I said at the beginning, we'd like to have 0 uses of force. If we could get to that point, that would be amazing. Ultimately, that would be our goal. Sometimes the hand is forced upon us in certain situations, but we do look at that, and some of the information that we've been able to ask some of our surrounding communities, like our East Side communities, and we do have one of the lowest uses of force compared to some of our other agencies and our surrounding cities. So I do think we still always have room for improvement. We would love, again, to have no use of force, and we would love to work towards that as a community. And we can always hope for that as well. Go ahead.
Oh, Scott, I was just going to say, for the next 2 questions, this really gets to something we've heard from several people, and that is, what does success look like? We have not yet developed metrics. I know that is the goal and hope of the city, not just to do change for change's sake, but do change to make things better. And so the 2 questions were, do we think we will be safer with these changes in the community. And the other is talking about school resource officers. Do we think that a change there will make the school environment safer? And we don't have that work done yet. Every good plan has to have metrics, and I just don't think we've developed those yet. Have we? We have not. So that is something we know that we have to do. Catherine had asked a question, why are we rushing to implement the plan? Could we slow down the process? Can I get your thoughts on that, Chief Behrbaum?
Sure. I think somebody else in tonight's meeting also mentioned this, that we can always improve. We can always look for opportunities to improve. And we're bringing this plan forward because, you know, our community members have an interest in this, and we also have an opportunity. Some of the events that have been going on around the community, around the region, and around the nation are impacting us and impacting how our community feels. We do have that mix of feeling safe. So we are moving forward because we don't want to just rest on our laurels. We do want to address some of the inequities that are in society. And we recognize that part of the reason why we're having these conversations is because we want to get that input. We want to hear, you know, of like, well, why are we doing this? Why are we on this pacing? And ultimately, we wanted to provide something because we didn't want to just have another plan. We wanted to be able to start moving towards something and start engaging the community. One of the things that I liked about tonight's conversation is we've had a few volunteers or who have stated that they want to volunteer to be a part of those solutions moving forward. So ultimately, we are moving it forward. We want to make sure that the council gets this feedback. But just like our policy manual is, it's a living document. And I think that a lot of these changes are going to be continued to change. And as we dive into the data and we examine it further, I think there's going to be opportunities to have some slight variations or changes of course. So I think that we are moving forward on it. Ultimately, this is truly some of the data that we want to put out. This is about transparency. That's one of the pillars for policing is transparency and accountability and public trust. So us putting out this information, the data dashboards, there have been some of these moments where some of the community members have said, well, I didn't realize that we've even had a jail. Didn't realize that maybe we had these type of incidents occurring because there's a lot of stuff that just happens and that the police department, we manage, we address, and maybe it's just hasn't come across someone's, information, the data hasn't been presented to them before. So this is about transparency. This is about accountability and public trust. And so these are all movements towards just maintaining the public trust, and we're committed to sharing that information.
Thank you, Chief. I will let everybody know, too, that there are some graphic tools on our website. I wouldn't say they tell you the whole story, but they do. There is a map that shows you crime that has occurred, and if anybody needs a link to that, I can give it to them. We also can show you the number of different types of crimes in different categories. I think what I'm hearing from the community is, I just don't want to know a number. I want to know if that number is a problem, and if it's a problem, what are you going to do about it? So we do have to work on some dashboard metrics so that we're actually providing the community the kind of information they want. Timothy asked about, is it possible for the public review of the police training plan? And I know, Chief, you've had a lot of interest from community members about documents, and you have posted some. What about the police training plan?
Sure. I think that's one of the medium-term goals is to review like our police training and look at everything from de-escalation, bias training, and I think Tim, you talked about the Harvard bias online test as well. And I think that is something actually a lot of our officers already actually have taken. And we are actively involved in like implicit bias. We've sent a lot of our officers to a lot of those type of trainings, crisis intervention, diversity, meeting with different community groups. It's a continuous evolution. It's a continuous process. So we will continue to do that. As we develop, we evaluate that will be shared with the public moving forward about our training plan as well. But if you have specific questions, feel free to, you can follow up with me and we can have a further conversation about that as well.
I'm also sort of hearing in these questions the desire to be able to easily go to our website and, check in and see what progress has been made on this plan and on any updates that we do to our protocols, our training plans. So making sure that's easy to find. This one I'm not so sure. I will maybe pitch it at the city administrator, but provide information on systemic racism and policies in the city. And I know City Administrator Bobkiewicz, you talked quite quickly that we have an equity team. How would a member of the public be able to see the work of that equity team or the results of the work of that internal equity team?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It is just beginning. I think, as you had just mentioned, one of the to-dos from this action plan will be transparency and reporting on our work. And so whatever we prepare to do that moving forward, we'll include that information.
Great. And I'm not sure who would take the next question, if it's you or the chief. Accountability. How does the public know that we are being accountable and we are holding ourselves to our values, our policies, our protocols?
Well, let me take a first crack. Sorry, Chief, I didn't mean to stop you in mid-breath there. Certainly transparency is the first step of that. We want to commit to doing things. We want to then share with the community that we've actually done them. Ultimately, the staff works for the mayor, the city council and the mayor are elected by the community. And I think that is sort of the accountability chain. The chief of police works for me. So, I mean, we are all accountable to others. And I think the way that the community holds us all accountable is by showing our work and by being transparent as we move forward. Chief, did you want to add to that?
I think you hit it, and by us putting the information out there for public consumption, putting it out there just readily available, I think that helps with that public trust. But I think it is that continuous sharing of data and the sharing of that information just to show that transparency. That's part of the reason why we're having this conversation, and we're looking for those type of comments to say, okay, then how do all of these action plans address that accountability piece? Thank you, Chief.
Daniel had asked a couple of questions, and one of them I think I've answered was, has there been a problem with protesters? I think the demonstration and protests in Issaquah were very Issaquah-like. They were comfortable, everyone was welcome, and there was great conversation and dialogue that happened at them. And the 500-person silent 15-minute walk through downtown was, if you didn't participate, absolutely stunningly moving. I saw people with tears in their eyes after because it was so moving. It was really well done. The other question that Daniel had was, and this is sort of the policing thing, how often are you actually stopping violent crime in progress?
I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but everyone's definition of what violent crime is a little bit different. Obviously, we respond to robberies, aggravated assaults, domestic violence, simple assaults, hit and runs, things like that. That are those crimes of violence. Our crime statistics are available on our website. If you do go on our police department website, there's a link again to the data for the Issaquah Police Department yearly 2019 crime statistics, and it'll show like the types of crimes that we have gone to, and it also shows the data of per capita crimes, of how often they're being committed as well. So I apologize, I don't have them in front of me. I can start looking for them, Daniel, but they are available to look at that as well.
Thank you for that. I'm going to move to some questions from Wendy. And maybe this goes back to this, what are our performance metrics that we're going to set to show that we're meeting the community's expectations? What evidence is there that IPD doesn't keep us safe? And before I go to Chief, I'm just going to go to City Administrator. Most cities, and our city, we do resident surveys, and I'm not sure, since you've only been with us for less than a year, if you've gone through that process with us or not, Wally. But there's usually a section in there where you get to take the temperature of your community on safety.
That's correct, Madam Mayor. And we do it usually every 2 years. So 21 would be the next year as we're looking at budget for 21, evaluating how that survey would be funded, how we would move forward with it. But we have done community surveys every 2 years for the last 8 or 9 years, and so we have the ability to track that. My understanding of the survey results over time is they've been very positive as far as community safety is concerned.
And again, before I go to the chief, I'm just going to add one comment here. I know that cities sometimes get optional questions for their survey. And I think in light of what we're hearing, we might want to dig in a little bit and get a little more granular on what safety means to different people and have questions about communities of color or anyone who has felt that they do not feel as safe in our community or as welcome as others. So that's something we may want to look into next time when we're putting it together, is focusing in on that area and getting a little more granular data. Chief, how would you address that question on what evidence is there that the IPD doesn't keep us safe?
I was actually going to reference the kind of the citizen survey that we do send out, and ultimately, I will say this, that's actually a really hard question to answer, because I think there is everyone's definition of what safe is. And I think we heard it a couple of times that some people are still uncomfortable to interact with the police. And so that adds to that, I guess, feeling of safety. So I think there is, issues that we do have to address. We do have to balance, what everyone's version of safety is. And we have to figure out what that is and provide that service, that right level of service for our community. One of the things that I kind of jotted down on here is that part of this bigger conversation is kind of like the systemic racism that does exist within a lot of different government functions. And as part of that, that is a bigger part of this. And so it goes into that safety. Do people feel that they are all getting an equitable opportunity? Do they feel that they are being served at the same level? So ultimately, that is a very difficult question to answer. And ultimately, we do want all people to feel safe. We want to make sure that people feel safe to either just interact or feel safe or fear or reduce any fear of reprisal from interacting with the police department. So that is a hard question.
Thank you, Chief. Wendy also asked about whether or not the IPD has a log of police misconduct, and does it go back as far as 2015? And if it doesn't exist, can it be created?
We do keep a log of citizen complaints. That actually is in our policy manual, and we do keep a log of that. So that is something that we can work towards figuring out how to post that online.
Thank you. I'm going to move to Jen's questions. Jen, thank you for talking about an infographic. I'm an engineer. I don't do well with words. I think it needs to be a very short report that's just, graphics that demonstrate the measurements. So I'm totally there with you. Infographics are amazing. The question you had was, what is the process to incorporate human services resources into IPD? And before I go to the chief, I just want to put my 30,000-foot comments out there. We provide public safety through several different departments or agencies right now. And my hope as mayor is that I convene all of my partners to sit down and talk about this incorporation. Eastside Fire and Rescue also does emergency medical response. They are a separate agency from us, even though they're assigned to Issaquah, and you see Issaquah written on their vehicles. They have a huge interest in also working with a population that is struggling and calling them every week, or they're getting called out every week. The chief we hired from Chandler, Arizona, who is now the head of Eastside Fire and Rescue, started a program in Arizona. And the metric that they used to measure performance was that those folks that were frequently using services, the list of them was reduced over time as they introduced community medical and mental health assistance into their resources. So we have resources in our police department. We have resources in their fire agency. We work with nonprofit social partners, and we also do bylaw enforcement, which is another one of our departments. So at the very high level, Scott, I'm hoping to bring you and the chiefs together and anybody who has a toe in this water, and have you design a system where we successfully integrate it. So at this point in time, I don't know where the resources will be integrated. We have to have that conversation. So could I get your thoughts on that as well?
Yeah, and obviously Jen also identified several other locations that we can use as, some of those different model groups to base off, some of those determinations of what would be the right size or the right fit for our community. In conversations with a lot of our community service providers, there's issues at a lot of different levels, and we would have to figure out what's the right size. Does it make sense to have, let's say, a staff of community service providers 24/7, or what is that right staffing level? What is the right amount of services? And once we get someone connected to services, and this is a conversation that we're having at a larger level too, is how do we reduce the bottlenecks at the different locations, like getting someone into housing, getting someone into mental health, or someone into substance addiction, treatment. So those are other conversations that we need to work on. It starts off by looking at the data. It starts off by then looking at what our mapping our resources and figuring out where they overlap and where we can have some efficiencies and where are some of the inefficiencies, and make that plan moving forward for our community.
Thank you, Chief. I also want to ask you a question about resources. I have the sense as mayor, and you can tell me I'm wrong in front of everybody if you want to. I feel like we have a lot of resources, and that we probably, in all likelihood, can have that kind of brainstorming session, find those efficiencies, and reallocate within our current resources. I'm very, very hopeful that we can retool through this more, through going through this process of looking at how we provide response and care for those that are in trouble. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. I think that we are constantly going to have a conversation about how we distribute resources within the city, but then also regionally. I do think that as all communities have this conversation, we have to be careful about how we transform or how we transition to different models, because some of our resources are not ready to take on certain applications or ready to take on the capacity or the intensity of some of the issues that our community is engaging with. So a thoughtful and methodical approach does make sense. So as we look at the data, as we look at what our current resources are, and what would make sense, then it is maybe possible. But so there may be a time where our current resources, we are going to have to overlap to make sure that we have a smooth transition to whatever that next model looks like.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to put you on the spot, but I sort of was. The second part that I forgot to bring up is that, we've heard mentioned here today that we don't want the, cycle of somebody getting in trouble and ending up in jail. We also have the cycle of somebody getting in trouble, having mental illness or drug addiction, and ending up at Swedish for several days, and then just being released. Swedish is a partner that needs to be at the table too, because it is this whole continuum of, there's a behavior addiction issue that has to be dealt with. Now there's something happening that involves the police and a social worker, and now there's an intervention, and maybe they go to the hospital. But right now, they get released, typically, which is not ideal. So that's another partner I forgot to mention we would have at the table as well.
Yeah, and I am optimistic that I see our community. We have a tremendous opportunity. We do have our own police department. We have our own 911 center so when calls come in, we're able to make sure they get triaged appropriately. We do have our own jail. And so and we have our own court system. So we have an opportunity to really partner a lot of these different resources and look at how our systems work, share information, and we have an opportunity to maybe do some really interesting things in our community.
I think so too. There's a couple of questions again about metrics and accountability, and I think we know we have to have that addressed. We have to have that clearly stated and transparent to the public. Cindy had asked, what are the specific plans to look at calls? Can we survey 911 callers? Can we get feedback on why people do not call and look at it from a needs basis? How do people get involved in equity issues, especially those with the expertise in the area? So not the last one, Scott, but the first three in there. Can we get information from 911 callers, and how do we know who's not calling us? I mean, that's a real tough one.
Yeah, in 2016, we actually were having this conversation when the immigration conversation came in, and we were talking to some of our partners in some of the other human services groups within our community, trying to get an idea of people who were maybe fearful of connecting with city government at all, in fear of addressing an immigration issue. So we have to continue to. I think that's why the opportunity to maybe have these community panels, to have those ambassadors that we can hear those stories and then say, okay, then what do we need to do different? What are the changes that we need to make that we can helpfully address those? So you're right, it's a challenge. We don't know who doesn't call us unless it becomes through a different channel. Over these last couple of months, I've had a couple of conversations where people have been scared to talk to us because they had an interaction, and I've been trying to reach out to them, and they're still not ready. They're not ready to have that conversation, and so that saddens me that's what's occurred, and we want to change that.
Thank you. We need to do more work in that area. Thank you for your effort. I did mention the one opportunity that I'm aware of, which is the equity group that City Administrator Bobkiewicz and I talked about for individuals to get involved in equity. But I also wanted to point out that our Human Services Coordinator, Monica, is in contact with many nonprofit groups and cultural groups in the city that we also use as sounding boards, that we can send questions out to or have panels with to ask them, what are the roadblocks to you feeling safe in this community, welcome in this community? So we are collecting that sort of data about our own community so that we have some places we can plug in and ask questions. Connie had asked, why do we have so few Americans living in Issaquah? But I think she also answered it. I've heard the same thing that Connie said, don't feel welcome. And so that's kind of, maybe a police thing, or maybe also let's all look in the mirror and find out what it is that would make somebody who has lived in other parts of the country say this is the toughest place they ever lived. That, as mayor and a community member, I find that heartbreaking, and there's got to be something we can all do to fix that. So I thought Connie brought up an excellent question about, we want to be that place where we are known for celebrating culture and diversity because we have International Food Night, because we have Cultural Dance Night, because we do things where we celebrate everybody's culture and heritage. And we're not there yet. It's not a policing issue, but it is a community thing that I think we can all work on. Personally, it just breaks my heart when I hear, I've loved living here for 26 years and I bump into somebody who says we've lived here for 7 and we've never felt welcome. Just makes me want to cry. So I know as a community, we all have work to do there. Tom had asked, can Issaquah become a nonviolent city? And I know during this process, Chief, our engaged community has been doing a lot of research about programs, like everything that's out there. We went to the community and developed a strategic plan last year. I'm not sure specifically that this was addressed in our action items. I know City Administrator Bobkiewicz had wanted us to somehow incorporate public safety goals, and it may be that the program that Tom is recommending has the goals that line up with what our city and our community wants to do. I'm not familiar with the program, but what would you like to comment on that?
I'll just echo, I do appreciate the input that we received from our community about different programs, because admittedly, trying to address a lot of the questions and address a lot of the concerns that are coming forward, we are, not able to get into all different initiatives or all different opportunities. So I need to do more research on that one in particular. Okay. So I appreciate that, though.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you for those questions. I am sure they have generated more questions. We have a couple minutes left. If somebody wants to indicate either by raising their hand an additional question or comment, that's fine. If not, if Joanne doesn't see any, I will just sort of start with some closing comments, and she can interrupt me if somebody puts their hand up. I want to thank all of you for coming. This is the largest, for me, city remote meeting that I've had to do. I was concerned that it would be hard to manage, but I think you were so thoughtful, so wonderful in your comments and your questions. Helpful feedback for us on this draft plan. We have more work to do. We own that. We know that. We're going to go back to council with all of this. I encourage you to send me any additional question or comments you have, if you think about it as you go to sleep tonight or wake up tomorrow morning, and we will incorporate all that as well. We have a fantastic community. You have a city staff that really loves being here and serving you, and is, just ready to tell you, we know we can do better, and we're going to really, really work on it. So thank you guys for everything. And Joanne, do we have any more questions or comments, or are we about to say?
Not that I can tell. It looks like the same people that had their hands raised before, their hands are still raised, so hard to tell if
they're waving
if they raised them again. We might, either unraise take your hand down and raise it again, or.
Oh, it's great. So I also want to thank Joanne and the chief and Wally for coming tonight and helping me facilitate this conversation. We got some great information. I think we covered a lot of different neighborhoods, and it was really well done. Thank you all. Thank you for spending 2 hours with us tonight, and there's a little bit of sun and warmth left for you to enjoy. Talk to you soon.